By the 1950s, commercial aviation in the West was defined by a rapid increase in speed and range. For those with the means, crossing an entire continent was no longer a week-long journey, but a matter of hours spent in pressurized, climate-controlled comfort. But inside the Soviet Union, the experience was far more grueling. Crossing the country from Moscow to Vladivostok meant boarding a cramped, noisy propeller plane for a 50-hour ordeal, involving at least 6 refueling stops and flying low enough to feel every bit of rough weather. The disparity became impossible to ignore in 1952, when the British introduced the de Havilland Comet. As the world's first jet-powered airliner, it flew nearly twice as fast and 15,000 feet higher than anything in the Soviet fleet. Looking to close this gap, aircraft designer Andrei Tupolev pitched a radical solution to his leadership. He promised he could deliver a competing, high-capacity jet airliner in just 3 years, and he could do it at a fraction of the cost of the Comet. Soviet officials saw an opportunity to secure a major Cold War propaganda victory on the tight budget. These high-pressure demands created the specific conditions for a high-stakes engineering gamble. Tupolev hit his 3-year deadline, but the triumph was short-lived. By 1958, a string of incidents began that defied standard aviation experience. On several occasions, powerful forces would suddenly hurl the aircraft thousands of feet upward into the sky, forcing the planes into near-vertical climbs that they were never designed to handle. Once pushed into the thin air at those extreme altitudes, the planes would stall and begin a violent, unrecoverable tumble back toward the Earth. Investigators were left racing to explain an aerodynamic mystery that didn't fit any known patterns of mechanical failure. The source of the mystery lay in the way Tupolev met his impossible deadline. He didn't design a new airliner from the ground up. He performed a massive engineering hack on an existing military asset, the Tu-16 bomber. To bypass years of research, he reused the bomber's main components. He kept the massive, fuel-thirsty engines and the heavy-duty military landing gear, plucking them right off the existing assembly line. He also kept the highly swept wings. While these were optimized for high-speed bombing runs, they made the aircraft difficult to control during the low-speed maneuvers required for civilian flight. The only significant structural change was in the middle, where he widened the central fuselage just enough to fit a pressurized passenger cabin. This hybrid creation was designated the Tu-104. While this shortcut saved years of development, it resulted in a civilian airliner that inherited all of the unforgiving, aggressive flight characteristics of a heavy, long-range bomber. Ironically, the Soviet gamble was aided by a failure in the West. When the British Comet was grounded due to its own fatal design flaws, the Tu-104 became the only operational jet airliner in the world. The Soviets seized the moment, flying the Tu-104 to London, Paris, and the United States. To the Western public and media, it was a shocking display of Soviet technological parity. But back in the cockpit, flight crews were struggling. Pilots complained that the heavy, unresponsive controls made the plane a nightmare to handle, especially during landings, where they maintained dangerously high speeds just to prevent a stall. Stopping was another issue entirely. With weak brakes and no thrust reversers, pilots often had to deploy a parachute during the landing roll just to keep the 100,000-pound aircraft from overshooting the runway. There was a massive gap between the triumphant global image of the Tu-104 and the white-knuckle reality for the pilots forced to fly it. As the mysterious updraft incidents continued through 1958, Soviet authorities initially ignored the reports, choosing instead to blame the flight crews for the near disasters. That changed during a doomed flight from Beijing to Moscow. As his aircraft was thrown upward, the pilot heroically radioed back specific details of the flight's behavior as it happened, providing the data needed to solve the mystery. Investigators realized that by widening the passenger cabin without lengthening the rest of the fuselage, Tupolev had shifted the aircraft's center of gravity dangerously toward the rear. This meant that whenever the plane hit a strong updraft, the rear heavy weight distribution and the bomber-derived wings worked together to force the nose into an uncontrollable upward pitch. Because the engines lacked the power to push through such a steep climb, the aircraft would rapidly lose airspeed and stall, leaving the pilots as passengers in a falling plane. These crashes weren't caused by a failing part, but by the physical compromises made to turn a bomber into an airliner in record time. Even with the flaw exposed, the aircraft wasn't grounded. Authorities simply restricted its maximum altitude and hoped the modifications would be enough. The Tu-104 became so notorious among the traveling public that it was even featured in dark folk songs of the era, reflecting a deep-seated fear of boarding the aircraft. The safety record was appalling. By the end of its service life, nearly 1 out of every 5 Tu-104s ever built had been destroyed in an accident. It remains a stark example of what happens when political optics are prioritized over the fundamental requirements of human safety. Paradoxically, despite its record of failure, the Tu-104 succeeded in transforming Soviet aviation. Because the jet was so heavy and landed so fast, civilian airports across the country were forced to rapidly lengthen their runways and build completely new terminals to handle the massive influx of passengers. The sheer speed of the jet age also necessitated the development of entirely new, modernized air traffic control systems to manage the faster pace of travel. The Tu-104 was a broken aircraft, but its existence forced the Soviet Union to replace its primitive network of grass fields and short runways with a logistics system capable of supporting high-speed jet travel.